Hello and welcome to
Offend Not, Despise Not, Hinder Not, Christian parenting podcast from the Second Baptist Church.
Yes, I'm Pastor Jason Robbins, and this is my wife Olga. We are on. This is, I believe, our fifth podcast.
Yes, it
So
is.
if you've been listening to us once a week, we're now entering month number 2. If you're binge listening to us, I would recommend taking a little bit of time in between each episode and give yourself time to digest it and see and think about ways that you can apply it in your own life. We've talked about the child as a person, and we've laid down the foundation for why the principles that we're going to be discussing are important and why they are valuable both on a psychological level, on a biblical level, on a relational level. But today we're going to begin to dive into the meat of what we've been leading towards at this point, and that is the restorative approach to conflict. Now, we are discussing specifically the context of dealing with children, but I think the longer you listen to this, the more you realize that the principles are applicable to all ages. So we wanted to begin today by presenting a couple of different scenarios that are typical, and you could substitute brother, sister, in the context, but we can all relate to multiple instances of these types of things happening with any of the time that we've spent with children. So, Olga, if you would start us off with sort of a school or classroom student context of conflict, and then I'll give one from home, and then we'll talk about the better and the not better ways to resolve those.
Well, conflicts happen, right? And I spent many years working in private schools, and frequently there are things that happen that, things usually happen during lunch, during recess, anytime that there is a group of children gathered together. So let's imagine the situation that I have witnessed more than once. It's the lunchroom, and somebody picks up somebody else's lunchbox and they throw it just to be funny. And the lunchbox maybe was not zipped, and maybe it spills, and you have food on the floor. One child who's very angry, maybe upset, maybe crying, maybe hitting. The other child saying, I didn't do anything, I was just trying to be funny. And there's usually an adult in charge who is trying, let's say it's a lunch monitor or a teacher, who is trying to come up with some sort of consequence or punishment or solution in the middle of chaos of the lunchroom, right? And I'm sure that some of our listeners are probably laughing or maybe crying in a similar situation. You know what I'm speaking about here.
Right. So we have children who are upset at one another, in a sense, sort of in an unintentional way. They weren't out for vengeance or
right. It wasn't malicious,
but there's an issue that needs to be resolved.
Right.
And I can think about one from home. If anybody here has siblings or cousins or even friends that you played with a lot as a child, or you have them in your own home, this is very close. But children are playing together. Maybe they're using one particular child's bunch of toys, and in the playing, they get carried away. They start enjoying a little bit too much, and one of the toys gets broken. The child who does not own the toys is the one who breaks one, and the child who is the owner of the toys gets very upset and angry that this friend of theirs or their sibling has broken their toy. And so their response is one of anger. And right away, they get upset and they yell at at their brother or sister, and then they hit them. And then the mother or the father or the grandparent hears the children fighting from the other room. And so in both of these scenarios, these are the problems that we're presented with. So, Olga, what are the ways that these scenarios are often, how are they often resolved? What's the kind of default way that we would normally handle these kind of situations?
That's a great question. I think frequently they're not resolved. It's like the fire that you're trying to put out as quickly as possible. So let's say in the first situation in the schoolroom, somebody can become very punitive, right? So to punish the person who did it, especially if it's not the first offense, and there is some sort of a consequence that seems logical to the teacher or the lunch monitor. So let's say it's a teacher, and she says, Bobby, because you were so mean and you threw the lunchbox, I'm going to punish you, and you're going to have to sit for 5 minutes during recess. Right now, at this point, the other person, the one whose lunchbox was thrown, actually they're not acknowledged, right? They're focusing on how to punish the person who caused the trouble or caused the unrest. So I would say this is not the opportunity for the restoration that that teacher is using. She is just trying to punish the situation. Sometimes if you're in a very chaotic context, it may be just like, well, it's not that bad, right? And the adult might just ignore it because the adult may be overwhelmed, overworked, and just doesn't feel like it's the big enough deal to worry about, and just leaves it to the kids to work out. So that's one situation. In a home situation, I was just thinking about it, how frequently, if it's a guest from outside the family, the parents might actually be upset by their own child whose toy is broken and who is crying or angry or hitting. And they may say something, well, remember, sharing is caring. You should share. He's your guest, right? Again, in this situation, we're disregarding what is happening to the person who just lost something. There could also be a punitive approach. If you do not stop crying right now, I'm going to fill in the blank. There will be some sort of a consequence. So again, either it will be ignored in terms of actually figuring out and using this as an opportunity for restoration and growth, or flat out even punish either the person who broke it or the person who is upset because they did not, quote unquote, share well.
So let's say, though, that the parent or the teacher, in the context, they do recognize that some interaction should happen between the two children who were involved.
Oh yeah, say sorry.
So often they would go, they would say,
sorry.
Tell them that you're sorry, right? And so they might, like, with their eyes down or through gritted teeth, I'm sorry. Or
Yes.
maybe they're crying, right? And then the other child says something like, that's okay, or
Right.
I forgive you. And I mean, so the form of that is good, right? I mean, those are the things that the Bible does command us to do, and those are the ideas that we carry forth in the idea of restoration. So, but why is that incomplete or not enough?
Well, I think that maybe we should go to the Bible to see how should we handle the conflict according to the New Testament. So there are several steps that should happen. And the difference between punitive and restorative approach is that in the punitive approach, there is an outside adult who says, I will be the one who decides what sort of punishment is appropriate here. In the restorative approach, the focus is not the punishment. The focus is there is a broken relationship here between the two of you. Something is broken. Your friendship is not whole at the moment. So what steps can we take in order for this relationship to be restored? This is a more time-consuming process, and it sometimes feels cumbersome. So adults frequently dismiss that because they go the shortest way. But that is not what the Bible commands. So maybe let's go to the Word and see what it commands us.
All right. And you've heard this before if you've been listening to this podcast for any amount of time. I'm going to be reading again from Matthew chapter 18. I do want to reference Matthew 5, verses 24 and around there, because in that context, Jesus is saying, if you bring your sacrifice to the altar and you recognize that your brother has something against you, leave your offering, go and deal with your brother, and then come back. And so in that context, Jesus is emphasizing that it's important to not let something between you and someone else, as much as is within your power, to be unresolved. But here in Matthew chapter 18, Jesus gives us a very clear blueprint. And so this principle and these steps are applicable in any context. So the way that Jesus is referring to it here, you'll hear him specifically refer to the church or the gathering of believers, but in any place where you have people who are dealing with relationships, this is applicable. And I'm going to read verses 15 to 20. Matthew chapter 18. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, and your brother or your sister, go and tell him or her their fault between you and them alone. If they hear you, you have gained your sister or your brother. But if they will not hear you, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if they refuse to hear them, tell it to the church. But if they refuse even to hear the church, let them be to you like a heathen or a tax collector. In other words, someone whom you don't expect to respond the way that they should. Assuredly, I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you that if two of you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where two or three are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. And I know that you're going to primarily focus on the opening verses 15 through 17, but I read all of this because in this context, it's important to recognize that this is the context in which Jesus is referring to two or three being gathered together and the Lord being present. So let's not miss that in this restorative approach, if we're seeking the Lord in it, that he's promised, because we are there together, that he is a part of this process that's happening.
Absolutely. And I think we also need to differentiate between peacemaking and peace loving. So I think a lot of us love peace, but we mistake the absence of conflict for peace. So, sometimes it may feel that if we do not talk about something that happened between us, this is not peace. But truly, it is not peace because it's just avoidance. Right? So this is where we may be peace loving, or that teacher who says, well, you just have to be quiet, like go sit out, calm down. She is peace loving, but she's not facilitating peacemaking, which is that process that Jesus is speaking about. So peacemaking actually requires work. And this scripture that you just read, that's the standard that is set in front of us as adults to say, these are your steps. So
I'm just going to interrupt because I just want to, I think this is important to point out too, that peacemaking addresses the inner person, right? The peace loving is primarily concerned with the outward component,
right?
Which means that oftentimes the inward person can be neglected. And so there may be no outworking of the conflict, but within it's still there because at least one of the person's heart, if not both, is unresolved because of the conflict.
Absolutely. So about 10 years ago, I discovered something called the restorative process. And there is an organization which I highly recommend looking up. It's called the International Institute for Restorative Practices. They're based in Pennsylvania. And they looked at the process of what happens. It actually started with the restorative justice movement that came out of integrating people who came out from prison. And they looked at the statistics and they said, well, when someone goes to prison because they committed a crime against society, they do their time, and then they come back and they're trying to re-enter the society that they have offended. But what happens is, because even though they did their time, let's say if they robbed someone in their community, let's say they stole somebody's car and they did the time in jail for stealing the car. When they come back, if that person lives on the street somewhere not far from them, they remember, you stole my car. Right? They still did not have the car. So they hold that grudge against that person. That person is expected by the society to be the villain because he never restored the relationship. And they fall into the cycle of crime, right? And so we have this problem of repeat offenders in some communities. Now, what they try to teach people is that what if that person comes back and through some work of the soul, he realizes that, okay, I have committed the crime against that other person. I have done my time.
Right. The punitive aspect of the justice has been taken care of. The penalty for what I did wrong has been paid.
Right. But at the same time, they need to face the person that they harmed and say, let's imagine the best case scenario. That person who stole the car is going back, knocks on the door of the person whose car was stolen. And he says, man, I stole your car. I cannot give your car back, but I just got a job with the minimum wage and I'll be making you payments every month until I make up to you what I have taken. That kind of approach had much higher degree of reintegrating people because there is forgiveness, there is telling of your story, there is empathy, and all these things, these are community builders, right? It's not just about punishment, it's about repairing what's broken. So then they studied these principles and they applied this to the classrooms and groups of children, and actually very well applies to family as well. And so when I discovered the restorative practices, there are these little cards, you can order them from their website, International Institute for Restorative Practices. I think it's $10 for 100 cards. They make them very accessible. so that everybody in your school or your church community, wherever you are, can carry this little card that has your process for restoration. So this is what it looks like. So let's take our first case where the lunch box was thrown. So instead of saying, "Oh, you threw the lunch box, I'm going to take away your recess privileges," that's punitive, right? Instead, you have to circle up. So that idea of 2 or 3 gathering together. Children do not necessarily know how to do it. They need to be taught. So the adult has to mediate. And the adult says,
so who would be involved in this circle?
So it could be any adult in the community who knows the questions. It could be the teacher, it could be the lunch monitor, it could be the principal, or it could be the parent if there are parent volunteers in that.
So and any of the children. So the only the 2 children, the one whose lunch was thrown and the one who threw the lunchbox.
Yes, generally, if there is a conflict just between 2 people, the circle is small. It's that if your brother sins against you, right, you go to that person. And then the adult can help lead them through the process that looks something like that. The first question says, "What happened?" Do not tell them what happened. Do not tell them what they saw. You say, "What happened?"
So you're asking each child.
So usually you start with the person who seems to be the offender.
Okay.
Right? So let's say in this case study, it is the person who threw the lunchbox. What happened? He looks down. He's like, "I threw his lunchbox." And then you say, "Well, what were you thinking at the time?"
So oftentimes the question that we ask next is, why did you do it?
Right. And somehow why you did it is a much more abstract questions. And when you say, "What were you thinking of at the time?" sometimes the kid will say, "Oh, I was just trying to be funny." Or once I had a boy who said, "I liked her and I wanted her to look at me." Right. And so sometimes it's a little revealing, right? It's just like, well, this is what I was thinking. And in a way, it humanizes that person to the victim, right? The next question is, well, what have you thought about since?
So we're still working with the first child.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because the other one is likely crying and they're slowly wiping their tears and they're listening and they're paying attention and they're seeing the other person as human. Their story is being listened to. What have you thought about since? Didn't think it was such a great idea, right? Sometimes they need a little bit of time. If the kids are very angry, sometimes it's important to establish that I'm going to let you sit a little bit and kind of cool down or play a little bit in that corner, and then I'll talk to you. But it's important for them to know that I'm not going to yell at you. I will be predictable. I will ask you the same questions as I did the last time. The process is fair. And the goal of this process is not for me to tell that you're in trouble and to punish you, but for you to figure out how this thing that is broken between the 2 of you can be broken. Question number 3 invites that same child, the one who committed the offense, who has been affected by what you have done and in which way. This teaches empathy. And he may say, "Well, you're affected because now you're not eating your lunch, but you're talking to me." He's affected because now he has no food to eat. Frequently, from what I've seen, and I've used it for many years, this is when kids start tearing up, because this is when that part of like repentance, right? This is where their human conscience, which is the avenue of the Holy Spirit in our life, is activated, right? And they're beginning to feel sorry for that person. And the last question is, well, what do you think you need to do to make things right? So instead of me saying, "You're going to sit out the recess, Bobby," I'm saying, "Well, Bobby, what do you think you should do to make things between you right?" And I have seen the kids do incredible things where they will be like, "Well, I think I can share my lunch. Or can I call my mom and ask you to bring him some McDonald's? Or can I bring him something tomorrow?" Right? They will come up with this empathy, repentance that is connected with empathy. So I think that we are almost out of time for this part 1.
Yes.
But let me repeat the questions one more time.
Yes.
And we have done it with our children.
Yes.
When
So
they
we're
were
gonna.
Younger.
So this particular topic, we're gonna, in our next podcast, we're gonna continue. We're gonna dig a little bit deeper into these questions and also have you run through the offended person. Like
Absolutely.
how the kind of a scenario of how in this instance they would respond to this. So go ahead, repeat the questions for us one more time, please.
The first question is, what happened? And then listen. It's important to listen.
And so, right. And then,
Everybody listens.
and this is, again, we're starting with the person who committed the offense, the
Yes.
child.
What were you thinking of at the time? What have you thought about since? Who has been affected by your actions and how? And what do you think you need to do to make things right?
Mm.
And I have to say that sometimes in the process of that digging, you find out that the offending party was also a victim in some way, and there was something that preceded that. So sometimes you have to switch sides a few times before we come to the actual real truth of what happens. And like I said, it is a cumbersome process, but it is worth it.
So it's definitely going to take longer than solely the punitive approach.
Absolutely.
We are teaching empathy and thinking about the consequences, not only the consequences of penalty, but the consequences on the other person for what you do. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, and then we'll finish this up. But it also seems like we're working towards, when this conversation is over, the goal is that even though the results of the actions are still there, that both children leave with a degree of satisfaction or understanding that this will hopefully be something that will not be repeated again. Not just because they're afraid of a consequence, but because they recognize how each other are affected by what they did. Is that a good summary?
The goal is empathy and community building.
Yep. Okay.
Right.
All right. And on that note, we're going to thank you for joining us today. And we'll be back with part 2 of the restorative approach next time.
Bye.